So fill in the blank for me. School avoidance is...
Okay. When a child has an emotional distress or discomfort about going to school, and they might tantrum, cry, hide under their covers, it's really scary. Before my son had school avoidance, I remember the first meeting with the principal was like, hold on to your seats, parents. These are the crazy years, hormones, changes, and performance and friends, and then throw on everything else. And then, so it's a perfect breeding ground for school avoidance.
Welcome back, everybody. I am your host, Stacey Uhrig, and today's podcast guest is Jayne Demsky, and Jayne is the founder of something called the School Avoidance Alliance. Before we get started, I just want to read to you guys something right off of her website, because I just don't think that we can get any clearer than this. Building the School Avoidance Alliance has always been a personal mission for Jayne because her son struggled with school avoidance on and off for many years. When his school avoidance started around 2009, very little information was available, and the stigma around mental illness was still potent. Her son was suffering from a severe anxiety disorder and depression. And as all parents know, when your kid is in pain, you're in pain. So her whole family was challenged and affected. They went through multiple mental health professionals until they found an experienced psychiatrist helping kids with school avoidance and anxiety disorders. Her school district didn't understand school avoidance and believed her son was manipulating them, and they delayed providing any kind of appropriate support and intervention. After a few years of interventions, advocacy, reading clinical research, learning special education law, and working with dedicated professionals, she got her son's life back. No family, no child deserves to go through a journey like Jayne had to go through with her family. So 7 years ago, she started sharing support and resources with families on her first website, which was called schoolrefusalhope.org. In 2020, Jayne realized to have better outcomes for school avoidance, she had to dedicate equal time and resources working hand in hand with educators, schools, and their mental health staff. The professionals in our schools play an essential part in getting our children back to learning. The School Avoidance Alliance is a community comprised of schools, families, mental health providers, and educational advocates committed to improving our kids' lives. Welcome, Jayne.
Thank you.
This is powerful. And, I have struggled with this in my own home. I have coached many families, specifically moms, who have children who are struggling with this. I have myself tried working directly with my own school district on their role in school avoidance. And I really just want to open it up for anybody that's listening today. If this speaks to you, you're going to want to reach out to Jayne. Her link is going to be in the show notes. But Jayne, tell us about the School Avoidance Alliance, and let's understand, why is there such a thing as school avoidance?
Okay, I'll start with the school avoidance. So the research shows that school avoidance has been documented since 1932. But back when my son was suffering in 2009, no one knew about it. And it really didn't become part of the lexicon with educators and parents who are affected with their kids until recently, post-COVID. And even still, most people don't know what school avoidance is, or have never heard the term, or school refusal. I'll use both terms, school refusal, school avoidance, because they're the same. So post-COVID, listen, it's where everyone's guessing. I've read many research reports, and it's kind of conjecture, so no one can say exactly. So it's really just guesstimating. My feeling is a few things. So a lot of kids have dealt with anxiety and stress and performance anxiety and huge workloads. Like you think about the middle school and high school kids, I've always been like amazed and angered that they would come home with like 2 to 3 hours of homework every night. It's like, where is the work-life balance, the school work life balance? How ridiculous. Like, why is this happening? So when the kids were off the COVID years, relaxed, work demands, spending more time with the family and communicating maybe more with friends and more relaxed. It was like, wow, this feels good, and it's just like after COVID, we adults said, I want to get more balance in my life. I realize how important my relationships are, time with my family. And when there was a shortage of good employees after COVID, employers had to work overtime to figure out how to incentivize getting employees. So they had to give them better mental health benefits, more days off, more money, because they realized, because we as adults, employees and parents and people, realize that we want less demands of our jobs. So the employers, for like in the business world or everywhere else, realize that. But for some reason, the message didn't get to the education world. And I thought, there should be more balance in our lives. And this is a time to reflect and say, what should we change here? What have we learned? I think the reason that they haven't gotten the message is because probably some of them do have the message. And I speak to people every day who are champions of progressive ideas for more student engagement. But I think that the schools are pressured. It's like they have the pressure from the Department of Education and all the testing. It's really, I guess, it's bottom line, maybe it's like goddamn testing,
I know.
that they have to have this certain learning, which I guess
Proficiency.
right. And of course, yes, we want our kids to learn, but at what price? There's got to be a balance somewhere.
So fill in the blank for me. School avoidance is.
Okay. When a child has an emotional distress or discomfort about going to school, and they might tantrum, cry, hide under their covers, it's really scary. And it's not like, when you go into a child's room and they're faking a little stomach ache. I mean, maybe it will start like that, but it's scary for a parent to see. And you can't grab them. That's what it would take to get them. They're so scared. So they are fearful or having some distress about going to school.
And you
And
can't grab them because typically they're bigger
yes.
and
And
not because you see school avoidance. Do any research studies show like where school avoidance is the hottest in what pocket, like as far as like elementary school, middle school, high school?
well, it's always the transitional years. And
Yeah.
it really, research showed in the past, pre-COVID, that middle school years were just hell, and it
Mhm.
makes sense because that is the big change from the demand on the student and the workload, from those intermediate to middle school. And there's
Mhm.
so much going on. I remember even before my son had COVID, before my son had school avoidance, I remember the first meeting with the principal was like, hold on to your seats, parents. These are the crazy years, hormones,
Yeah.
changes and, performance and friends, and then throw on, everything else. And then, so it's a perfect breeding ground for school avoidance.
So I want people to understand this because I really want to paint a picture for the people that are listening. You mentioned school avoidance is not just, a kid that's like faking a stomach ache. What does school avoidance look like to a family?
Yeah. That's a really good question, and that really sets the stage for me to give you an answer there, a complete picture. What happens, and this I want to talk from my experience, but I speak to families every day, and we have a peer support group, so I hear what's going on, and everyone's situation is pretty much some common denominators. Common denominators are like, if a child is school avoidant, you never know what you're going to get. You never know before you go to bed that night. You're anxious as the parent. Are they going to go to school? Are they going to cry and scream? Are they going to hide? What's going to happen? I hope this is the day. So you walk tenuously to your child's bedroom and you're
In the
praying.
morning.
Yeah, you're praying
Yeah.
that they're going to wake up and go to school. And if they don't, you might have, the mom and dad there. And one of the parent might be screaming, get out of bed, get the hell out of bed. This is ridiculous and mad. And listen, I did that first. I probably wasn't that bad, but my husband was. Sorry, husband. But, it's very easy to lose your temper when you don't understand what's going on. You just feel your child's being defiant. It's not defiance.
Right. And I want
Feels like
to talk about that. So number one, I'm going to want to talk about why parents scream in that moment.
Please tell us.
But
Do you know?
yes, but before we get to that, I want you to explain to people why it's not defiance.
Mm-hmm. Well, it feels like defiance because for oppositional defiance disorder, I started reading about this because people always jump to that conclusion that it's oppositional defiance.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that with my son too. But the differentiator between ODD and school avoidance is that supposedly, maybe you probably know about this too, that kids who have ODD are more adversarial.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and I'm going to say something that might be controversial. So there's a couple of things I'm going to say. Number one, we're really trained to say, I have anxiety, or my child has anxiety, or my child has obstinate defiance disorder. Nobody has ownership of that shit and nobody wants it. So we need to stop using the term I have, and we could simply say, have
so
been
true.
Diagnosed with. Okay.
Yes.
Because if you don't want it, don't take ownership of it. So number one,
yep.
That's not the controversial part, by the way.
Okay.
When it comes to oppositional defiance disorder, be clear. I am not a therapist. I am not a medical professional. I am not a licensed social worker. I am not a psychiatrist. So people who maybe disagree with my personal point of view could be in that realm. Oppositional defiance disorder is a diagnosis with a code in the DSM-5. The DSM-5 is the Diagnostic Statistics Manual. This is a book that mental health professionals who are responsible for diagnosing issues must use in order to get paid by insurance. There are many things that are not in the book that have tried to get into the book, that have been contracted to be put into the book, that are probably a more appropriate diagnosis. And those two things are complex PTSD and developmental trauma disorder.
Yeah.
And anybody that wants to understand that concept can go buy the book, The Body Keeps the Score. Bessel van der Kolk does a phenomenal job describing the whole chaotic, fucked up mess of the DSM-5. However, that being said, oppositional defiance disorder is in that book and it fills the gaps. Here's the problem. Might your child be oppositional and defiant? Sure. But there's nothing in that oppositional defiant diagnosis that talks about how maybe they got there. There's no talking about what happened where this is the symptom, that this is the behavior as a result of. So instead of looking at maybe the environment that the child's in, or maybe the stresses that they're feeling, or something that's going on in their life where ODD is becoming, I'm going to put in quotes, the diagnosis, it's really a symptom of something much bigger, but that something much bigger is not in the book.
Same with school avoidance. School avoidance is not in the DSM.
And
it's a symptom.
That's right. And so I'm really like, I get a little bit like on a soapbox when it comes to these diagnoses, because what happens is people harness onto it. Okay. And what I'm going to say, and I'm actually doing a whole episode titled this with my friend Vincent, fuck the label, because the problem is that when people are given this label, they attach themselves to it. I have, my child has. And instead of doing the work to figure out how we got here and what is this a greater symptom of, we try to find a way to fix the behavior, but you're not looking at the root cause.
Very
Okay.
true.
Okay. So with that, it's really important that people understand that the defiance, quote unquote, that people think come with school avoidance, they need to take that out of the picture. No child wants to be stuck at home with their parent. We're hardwired for connection. We're
Yeah.
hardwired to be social.
Yeah.
So unless we're doing the work to get to the root cause of the discomfort that you talked about, with the feelings that somebody has when they go to school, disconnect, not feeling seen, not feeling heard, not feeling significant, not feeling important, not in a grandiose way, but just enough that they matter.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of shame are they walking with that is so heavy of a burden that they literally cannot get out of bed? Because if they go to school, they feel more of it. What
Yeah.
is it about maybe the way that they learn or the way that they socialize that is keeping them feeling so stuck?
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't feel that they fit within the norm or they fit within the box, but yet
Mm-hmm.
everybody's shaming and blaming them for not being able to. So it's a wicked circle and a cycle.
Yes. Yeah, it's tough. We have the peer support group and we talk all the time. And I try to tell the parents, there's nothing really wrong with our kids. There isn't. There's nothing
Right.
wrong with them. They might have an anxiety disorder, they might have trauma in their lives, or be depressed, or they might not, and they might have a learning difference, or a learning difference that is not being treated effectively. And this happens a lot with appropriate modifications and interventions.
Right.
To give you an example, I have a parent with a son. I've been talking to her in our peer support group for a year, and it is obvious this kid has been overwhelmed. He's had school avoidance for a really long time. They just started getting him back to school, and he was doing great. And I said to the mom, what kind of modifications and accommodations do they give him? None. She goes, oh, we're working on a 504. I'm like, okay, 2 months later, 504. They didn't give him any modifications. They didn't address his attendance. They didn't cut him any slack or give him the opportunity to be successful. The demands were never lowered to meet him where he was at in whatever he's dealing with. So that drove me nuts, and that got me so
And I
mad.
think we need to discuss this
Yeah.
because I am quite sure there's got to be somebody that's listening that's like, oh God, these kids, they're soft. Tell them
Oh,
to suck
yes,
it
yes.
up,
Yes, yes,
right? Tell
yes.
them to just get over it. I got up and went to school, but.
Yes.
I think the landscape is very different. Okay. The expectations are higher. The pressure is more. I live in a very high pressure, high achieving school district. So I see it a lot. The pace at which kids are learning things. My kids were learning and reading things in middle school that I did in 10th grade. So the expectations are higher. And I think the kids are walking with more stress, and it doesn't have to be from school per se. There's the way we do sports now is outrageous. Like all of the everything is extra, extra, extra. But we're human beings. We're not human doings. So why do we expect that our kids can do more when they're no different than how we were growing up? Okay. So going back to the accommodations, what people don't understand is that if we're dealing with a mental health issue, if we're dealing with some sort of wound that needs to be healed in order to get the child into school, appropriate accommodations are not only required, they're necessary in order to not give the kid a leg up, but to level the playing field.
Yeah, that's what modifications do.
Right. People need to understand this. And by the way, side note, and this is where I can become a little bit of a bitch. If there's a parent listening right now who has been avoiding a diagnosis for their child that could be appropriate, and a diagnosis for perhaps the way that they learn, and your child is avoiding school, it's time to step back and ask why you're avoiding. Because when our families avoid the child's truth out of their own shame, they're doing more harm than good for the child. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why these kids are feeling stuck. But if they don't feel as though it's a level playing field, trust me, if they're looking around and they know that they're different and they're feeling different in a way that's giving them a negative self view, they're going to have a really hard time showing up, especially when we're 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. It's like the worst time to be growing up for anybody.
Yeah, the accommodations modifications thing, it's always a contentious issue between people bring their own perspectives and insights and perceptions into it. My daughter was very lucky. I don't know if it's because my after she came after my son and there was so much going on between my school district, I actually had to sue them. So maybe they were just helpful for my second kid, but she has anxiety disorder, never school avoidance, thank gosh. And every day that kid went to school, I was like, thank you. I'm so grateful that you're getting out of bed and going to school every day. But she has bad anxiety, so they gave her modifications. So that looked like maybe on her math homework, well, the kids got 30 questions. Maybe she had to do 10 or 15.
Right.
So things like that, or that she had scaffolding where they broke assignments into pieces and she was able to have support for each level.
Yeah.
Accommodations such as taking a test in a different room or taking a test 1.5 times, to finish it.
Mm-hmm.
So that helped my child be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And she is at a great university right now. And most universities have disability support services. So, but it's really up to the professor. That's another story, another time. But she doesn't have the only accommodation she has taken is extended time because she might have had like a panic attack finishing something, but she hasn't had any assignments modified. So when people say, "Oh, we're not going to modify and accommodate this child because when he goes to college, they're going to be shocked. How are they going to handle it?" But it's not true. The child saw success and was be able to get that self-esteem that they can do and achieve.
Big part of it.
Without that, how can you move on? So,
well, self-esteem is everything. And I just want to wrap up this particular episode because we're going to do an episode part 2, but we were talking earlier about why parents scream and kick.
Okay, tell me.
Well, they're fearful.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
They're fearful that their kid's not going to get up. Yeah. They're fearful of what does that mean then? They're fearful of, is the person ever going to go to school? They're fearful of, how do I go back to the school one more time? They're fearful of the school judging them. They're fearful of the school judging their child. So in a split second, all of that fear becomes rage. Maybe I can scare them into going. Maybe I can shame them into going. And what people need to realize is one of the very first things we can do as parents and as family members of a child that's feeling so stuck they're avoiding school is to change the way that we are reacting and go from reacting to responding. Tell me why you feel like you can't go today. Give them voice and choice. Allow them to share how they feel because shame cannot survive in secrecy. So if they're feeling shame and they have a safe place to land and express an emotion, and by the way, let's be clear. If you ask a 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old kid how they feel, they're likely not to bounce out of bed and tell you how they feel. But the moment you begin to ask, you're opening a door. You might have to ask 4, 5, 6 times slowly, calmly, genuinely, before a child feels in tune enough and safe enough to really express how they feel without judgment. But
It
I
might
can
not be a good time.
guarantee,
Yeah.
yeah, the screaming and the yelling and the kicking and the shouting and the shaming and the blaming, it doesn't work.
It never works. No.
It doesn't work. So I just want to end it there because it's such an integral piece to it. And what I'd love to do in our part 2 is talk about the schools.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about how to help these parents
Yeah.
navigate this with the schools. I want to talk about what is the responsibility and the role of the schools in
Yes.
the school avoidance.
We'll cover that.
Okay. And what is our appropriate expectation of the school district's role?
Yeah.
Because what ends up happening in these situations is all of the onus falls on the parent.
Yes.
All of the onus falls on the parent. They blame the parent, they shame the parent, they blame the student, they shame the student, they see it as all behavioral. And in retrospect, it's a behavior, but it's a behavior of something much bigger.
Yes, that's a good point. Yes.
Okay. And so I really want, if this is speaking to people, and we've kind of gone in a couple of different directions, but if you or someone you know has a child that's struggling with this, you're going to want to tune in to the next episode so you can walk away with a couple of ideas and maybe some talking points on how to actually advocate for your child in an appropriate way and actually make the district responsible for the things that they need to be responsible for. So, guys, thank you so much for allowing us to have this conversation today with Jayne. If people are not going to make it to part 2, I want you guys to check out the show notes. Jayne's foundation is called the School Avoidance Alliance. She is the founder. She is the expert. She works with parents. She works with schools. And if you have a child that is refusing to go to school, that is avoiding to go to school, and you feel like you have nowhere else to turn, you need to check Jayne out. Her link isn't going to be in the show notes. So,
Stacey, I have to mention one thing as well.
yeah,
We have a school avoidance masterclass with parents and
please
the
tell us.
clinicians and experts in it. I call them the dream team because I've been doing this for 10 years and I met these people back in the day when I was looking for help for my son. And I don't know, I got so fortunate from having a kind relationship with them and them knowing that this is a big issue. They agreed to do modules on a masterclass to help families.
And tell me about that masterclass. What does it incorporate and why would somebody want to engage in it?
Well, it's really important because it covers, first of all, first-line treatments, which is cognitive behavioral therapy with exposure. Not saying that, there aren't enough exposure therapists in the world today, so you might not have one. But when schools help kids, they base that on exposure therapy, which is reintegrating. I'm not going to get into all that now, but that's important. We also have parental strategies from an expert in school avoidance, a clinician who treats kids all the time. And we also have the 4 functions of school refusal and the school refusal assessment scale, that module, and that is all covered and by Dr. Anne Marie Albano, and she is actually the co-author of the School Refusal Assessment Scale Revised. And we also, it's really important to have a special education attorney. That I search for so much information on the law because to find out your right to an education. So that is like a golden module as well. There's more, but go to the website, schoolavoidance.org, and look up our parent masterclass. If I had that when my son was struggling, blah, blah, blah. Oh my God, he wouldn't have been struggling for so long because it has all the answers I didn't have. So that's it.
It's a blessing. Honestly, guys, I wish I knew about it. If any parent has ever struggled with school avoidance, just know that you are seen, heard, and understood. And there is hope to feel better and to get a better result. There's no magic bullet. There's no question about that. But this is a resource that is like a little bit of a golden egg. So you want to check it out. The link to all of that will be again in the show notes. And you're going to want to stay tuned for part 2 of our interview, where we're really going to talk about how to engage with the district in a way that they're actually responsible for their part of school avoidance as well. If this spoke to you, you're going to want to subscribe to Flip Your Mindset so you can get all the notifications of when all of my casts drop. We drop one every single Monday. Thank you guys so much for listening. Take care.